Good morning and welcome to another Tuesday tour. It's John Sauter along with April Holleiter with a glove on her hand, and that tells you it is 16 degrees this third week of classes as you're seeing this on campus. We're actually out on the west side of campus in front of Earhart Hall. And so today we're going to talk about Amelia Earhart. And what better way to talk about her than to talk to Amelia herself, and she's waiting for us inside. Amelia Earhart, aka Mary Alice Nebold, a retiree. Several retirees dressed up as different characters. You've seen John Purdue. Mary Alice dressed up as Amelia Earhart, so we'll be talking with her a little bit and learn more about Amelia by way of Mary Alice. But first of all, we're in front of Earhart Hall. Earhart Hall opened in 1964. Some of you might have lived here then. It was all women when it first opened. Now it is co-ed. It has learning communities, an engineering learning community. The name of the student organization here is Itasca, which is the last ship to hear from Amelia on her ill-fated flight. So a lot of historical connections. And speaking of that, behind me is a statue, a larger-than-life statue of Amelia Earhart. This was donated in 2009 by Susan Buckley Butler as a way to remember Amelia, to inspire students, and to really connect the campus to the history of Amelia Earhart. And so now let's venture inside and talk to Amelia. We're back inside. It's a little warmer, I can tell you. Behind me is the main lounge of Earhart Hall. I wanted to make sure we saw this, as some of you again may be familiar. When the H halls were built, we always made sure we had a main lounge, or kind of a formal meeting room, kind of a living room in each of our facilities. And so many of you perhaps have gathered here. Earhart Hall also has one of our dining courts. We now have neighborhood dining courts. And so the Earhart dining court is where the dining court used to be, downstairs. Sorry ladies, the pajama lounges are gone on both sides. And now we actually went from wall to wall, ceiling to floor. And we have a Mongolian grill as the feature in this particular hall, very popular with our students. I contend it's the best stir fry in town right here in Earhart Hall. So yet another reason for you to come back. Well, we want to continue to talk about Amelia Earhart, for whom the hall is named and really had an impact on Purdue. And here we are. Amelia, good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here.
It's nice to be here and be seen.
I guess. So let's talk a little bit about Amelia. Really became globally recognized, I think, after her flight across the Atlantic. So tell us about that flight, what led up to it, and some things about it.
Well, I'd be happy to. Actually, I made 2 flights across the Atlantic. First, I went as kind of a bag of potatoes, because all I did was keep the log for Wilmer Stultz and Lewis Gordon, who flew. And that flight took us 20 hours and 49 minutes in order to get across the Atlantic. But the second flight, 4 years later, which I decided I just wanted to do this flight, to show that women could do this. And it didn't always have to be a man at the controls of the plane. And so it started in, in Teterboro Airport in New Jersey to go up to Harbor Grace at Newfoundland, which is the beginning point for my solo flight across the Atlantic. And we had to make sure that the weather was going to be good, going all the way across. And actually, I found out only a few minutes before I was to leave there in New Jersey that the weather was good for all the way across the Atlantic. At least that's what the reports said. So we left then from Harbor Grace, and at first it was really easy. And then all of a sudden, I lost the altimeter. So I had no way of knowing at what height I was flying. And then went through a thunder and lightning storm. And that took another about hour. And then I ended up with the manifold seam breaking. And so I could see the flames from the cockpit, but I had seen them with the other flight that we took, so it didn't frighten me too much. But I was tempted to maybe come back to Newfoundland. But then I thought, no, 4 hours, might as well go ahead. So I climbed above the clouds. And then this plane became very sluggish. And oh my, I thought, what is wrong? Well, there was ice that appeared on the windshield. And then the plane went into a spin, and I dropped 3,000 feet.
Oh.
I could see the whitecaps when I finally got the plane leveled off. And so at that point, I flew lower. But then the fog caused a problem. And so I contended with fog and thinking about the ice up above. But then, excuse me, we flew on, and then there was the manifold was causing really lots of vibration, and I decided that I needed to go down at the first spotting of land, and I saw a fishing vessel in the ocean, and so I thought, oh good, I'm not too far from land. And the land appeared. I looked for a railroad track because that was my guide to maybe a village and where there might be a runway. But there wasn't any at the first village. So I went to got on farther, and lo and behold, there was no landing strip there, but there was this large pasture with lots of grazing cattle. And I thought, I've got to put down. So I went down, hoping that I wouldn't hit any cattle, and got the plane stopped near where the lone farmer was standing. And I got out of the cockpit and I said, where am I? And his response, in an astonished way, said, in Gallagher's pasture. Well, it turned out I was near Londonderry, Ireland, and I was about 200 miles north of the track that I was supposed to be on to get to Paris.
Okay.
So he wanted to know where I came from, and I told him, America.
Yeah.
And so then the farmer who owned the land, when he came, he wasn't quite sure he could believe his farmhand.
Okay.
So that's the story of my
Flight across the Atlantic.
Flight across the Atlantic. The problems that I had caused, well, I didn't go to sleep, and which was a concern. I had flown 2,056 miles in about 15 hours, 14 hours and 54 minutes, I think it was. But I don't like coffee, I don't like tea, but I have smelling salts. But this time I didn't use the smelling salts to keep me awake. I used the smelling salts to help my concentration.
Okay.
The problems kept me awake.
Okay.
I didn't even eat anything.
Okay.
I drank and sipped on tomato juice, and so.
Speaking of tomato juice, it's a good time to show you that in the archives is the actual ice pick that Amelia Earhart used on that flight to punch a hole and put a straw into a can of tomato juice. There had to be a little bit of tomato juice spray all over you, I would suspect. But it's the actual ice pick that is used. And the archives at Purdue, as you're probably aware, has the largest collection of Earhart memorabilia of any place in the world. And so if you're a fan, this is the spot that you really need to go to. So that flight really brought you a lot of attention, which led, and we'll jump ahead a little bit now, to New York City. And this is the what turns out to be a historic meeting with our president, Purdue Edward Elliott. The two of you are speaking at the same conference in New York City. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
That was an exciting time. It was a conference about women in the changing world. And President Elliott had spoken about something about Purdue and his feelings about education of women. And I followed him. And I told about women in aviation, but I also talked about women and their need to do whatever they wanted to do, to prepare themselves, that they were intelligent human beings. They could choose and do whatever they wanted to do as a career. And he evidently liked what he heard me say, because he and George, my husband, and I spent a couple of hours together at dinner that night talking about Purdue and talking about women and education and so forth. And he came up to me and sat across from me, and he said, "Amelia, I want you to come to Purdue." And I said, "I'd like that if it can be arranged." And so that was in 1934. In June of 1935, the contract was signed. I would be on campus for a few weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks each school year, and talking with women. I was a counselor, advisor for women students, talking about careers, talking about life in general, as well as an advisor for the aeronautics department. So,
Okay.
And my salary was $2,000 a year. In
All right.
1935. So
that brought you to campus in 1935. You were here 2 years. And how was your reception on campus and in the community? Here they have this famous aviatrix right on campus.
Well, it was great. Certainly President Elliott was very supportive. The Dean of Engineering, Dean Potter, was not as supportive. He didn't feel that I was scholastically qualified to be called a faculty, a visiting professor, and because I didn't have a degree, but I felt I was qualified. But the wives of some of the professors were a little bit skeptical about me, but they finally realized that just because I wore slacks downtown was not
a little wild in your day, I think.
A little wild in my day. But I made a 3-point landing at the airport that November, and I had lunch with the administrators of the Home Economics School, with Dean Mary Alice Matthews and her department heads. I was in a flurry of activity. I was given a desk in the Dean of Women's office with Dean Dorothy Stratton there, and Helen Schliemann, who was at the residence hall's director. And but it was a busy time.
I guess. Use your time when you were here.
I had dinner with mortarboard in Cary, so I made it all around campus.
Now, you lived in Dumie Hall, Dumie 103, as a matter of fact. We have previously done a video from Dumie 103. And so how was that experience living in Dumie?
I felt like a student because the students welcomed me. It was great. And I heard that they kind of tried to get at the table where I was seated that night because they wanted to talk with me. But it was great that I was with the students, not only in classes, not only in individual conferences on campus, but there in the hall, we could be casual, sit on the floor and talk, or sit at the table, and I listened to the students because I felt it was important that young ideas be heard. And so it was neat.
Yeah. Well, lastly, let's wrap up. We can talk a little bit about something actually that Mary Alice and I have talked about as we've researched and gone through the understanding that the actual Lockheed Electra twin engine that was retrofitted, a 10-passenger airliner retrofitted with gas tanks all over the place. Whether it was actually here and whether they practiced with your navigator out here, and what have you found on that and that subject?
Well, I have found that Amelia took charge of her plane, was given the plane in July of 1936. And it was in California where the plane was built by Lockheed in Burbank, in their headquarters there. And for the first month, I flew the plane between Burbank and down to San Diego and back and forth, trying to learn all of the innuendos of that plane and all the equipment that was on board. And I felt like I'd kind of made a groove in the the area. In September, because George had promised Purdue that the plane would be hangared here at Purdue, that I flew the plane, but not with my navigator, with another person with the company, and we flew to Purdue. And the hangar 1 is where the plane was housed. But that was the end of September. In October, I made 25 speaking engagements in the Midwest, in the East Coast, and so I traveled by car and I traveled by train. And then I came back to Purdue, and in the first couple of weeks of November, of course, I was here on campus with the plane. But and then in the middle of November, flew the plane to New York for checking on the equipment of the plane, and then back to California.
And then I think the flight started in Oakland.
The flight started in Oakland.
Heading around the world.
The first start was toward Hawaii, and that's where there was a problem in the takeoff toward Howland Island.
Yeah.
And so then it was repaired, and then we decided to fly east instead of west.
East route. Wow. A lot of interesting tidbits here about the flight. It doesn't just happen when you go up and fly and land there. I want to make sure I point out that it was the Purdue Research Foundation that paid for the plane and all the training and the navigator and all that sort of thing. That was part of the exchange, part of the agreement between President Elliott and Amelia. Hangar 1 is just a mile and a half this way. Hangar 1 is still there out at the Purdue Airport, as a matter of fact. But really a nice way to kind of bring all that to life. So anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I'll add one more name. R.B. Stewart was the founder of the Purdue Research Foundation, and he's the one who masterminded that Purdue. David Ross was very impressed with me and with wanting Purdue as part of the team. So,
okay. R.B. Stewart. He's come up in a lot of our videos that we've done, as a matter of fact, around the campus. So very good.
He masterminded that.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Mary Alice Nebold is available if you'd like to have her into your classrooms or some of your civic clubs or groups, that sort of thing. A lot of history to share here. You can reach her at her email, Nebold, Nebold, @purdue.edu. So thank you for watching on behalf of April and your Purdue Alumni Association. Hail Purdue.